Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session on Gestalt theory and principles. This is actually a German word that is pronounced as Gestalt, okay, not Gestalt. Uh, what is this German word all about? It's about pattern or configuration. I will come to that in a minute. Let me give you some additional background. This was founded in the 20th century in Austria and Germany. Okay, it can be called as a philosophy. Okay, in fact, it proposes or advocates the theory that whole is bigger than sum of its parts. In fact, this particular statement has been attributed to Aristotle also. Okay, so the whole of something is always bigger than the sum of its parts. So Gestalt theory, proposes or advances this particular way of thinking, right? That whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. Gestalt theory, is a very fundamental work, and it forms the backbone of the modern study on perception also. Okay, so where is this theory or principles applied? It can be applied in product design, logo design, in designing websites, in user interface design. That's what I'm calling as UI UX. It can be used in marketing campaigns also. Can it be used in business intelligence? Of course, yes. In the way you present your data in the form of graphs and visualizations, some of these principles can be applied very well in psychology. In fact, when Gestalt, theory was pronounced, right, it was primarily meant for psychology. It can be used a lot, in understanding human relationships, right? Because this theory is about perception. This theory is about our tendencies, innate tendencies. When we look at something, what are our innate tendencies? What are the ways in which we perceive? What is our natural way of perception, right? So this is more useful for psychology, rather it is developed primarily for psychology and for understanding human relationships and how humans engage with others and with themselves, right? So other disciplines saw benefit in using these principles, and hence this is used very widely in many areas of business like product design, logo design, so on and so forth. So I'm going to give a lot of examples, as I walk you through the Gestalt principles. So there are 7 core principles, that we are going to talk at length. We have closure. There is the principle of similarity. We have continuation, proximity, symmetry and order, figure ground, and finally simplicity. Okay. I like simplicity, more than uh, any other Gestalt principles. We are going to cover all of that in detail. Okay. I will also explain why I love simplicity, when we come to that. As I said, this is about how we perceive, this is about how our innate tendencies are, right? I mentioned earlier, Gestalt means, patterns or, configuration, right? So pattern recognition is in fact a core human intelligence. I don't know if you are aware, pattern recognition has been used in designing software, and in fact we replicate that human intelligence, rather we try to replicate the human intelligence in software. In fact, that stream of software is called as artificial intelligence. The backbone of artificial intelligence is pattern recognition. We try to replicate the way humans recognize patterns in our software, and hence the name artificial intelligence. So Gestalt theory, Gestalt principle, leverages our innate ability to recognize patterns. If you look at these, figures, right, you are able to identify some pattern, right? This is the rectangle, and in the middle of that rectangle, some words are written. That is a pattern. What is a pattern, by the way? What is a pattern, by the way? The meaning of Gestalt, that's the German word. It means pattern. And what is a pattern? Pattern is a consistent, recurring characteristic, right? As I mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, humans have an innate ability, okay, innate tendency or ability to recognize patterns. So we are going to study that. What are our innate tendencies, right? That's what we are going to learn in this particular session. Is there another n in this? Is it one n or two n? I'm not too sure. Okay, let's not worry about it. This session is about the right side of things, right? There is the left side of the brain, the right side of the brain. The left side of the brain is more the data driven, right? We want to look for data and everything. The right brain is about innovation, is about images, is about perception. So we are talking about the right brain things. We are talking about pattern recognition. We are talking about innate tendencies. When we look at something, what is our innate tendency? That's what Gestalt principles talks about. So people in marketing, people in technology, people in management, we want to leverage, take advantage of these tendencies, in the way we design products, in the way we design logos, right? That's where the application of Gestalt principles come in. So that's so far the background is concerned. So now let's go through each one of these principles in detail. So the first one is similarity. I have put two images. The one on the left, what do you think about this image? Would you say that all the fish that is moving in this direction, are they same? They are similar, right? So we have a tendency to group objects that are similar. Look at the color, right? The color is very different. Some are, grayish blue. That's quite different from this blue, right? The size differs. Size differs significantly. Look at the size of this fish and look at the size of this fish. The size differs significantly, yet we have a tendency to group them together. In fact, the presence of this red fish accentuates, this grouping. Because this is going on the other side, we tend to think that anything that goes on this direction, right? So you tend to think that they are all similar and they belong to one group, although they do not belong that way, right? This is the way we perceive. Now, where can I apply this? Segmentation. What is segmentation? If you have a group of customers, would you not like to group them as small and medium business, large accounts, retail customers? That's what I'm doing here. I can segment customers based on characteristic one and based on the way people will group. I want to do both ways. Many times marketers rely too much on the left side approaches like data and say that these are the four segments of customers that I have among all my target group. But real life customers may perceive differently, right? They may think that it's not four groups, but rather it's only two groups, right? So listen to customers, because we have an innate tendency to group people together. Today, there are sophisticated software available. We can even use artificial intelligence to segment customers. But bottom line is, listen to your customers, because the way you see segments is different from the way the customer sees segments. Your data may say that you have 10 segments of customers, in your target group, but customers may feel that it's a matter of only 3 or 4. You may be designing 10 different type of products for 10 customer segments, but in reality there are only 3 or 4 customer segments. So you can save a lot of money. Wasted effort can be avoided. This is a very, very innate trait. This is useful for marketers, this is useful for politicians too, right? Because politicians should also understand the different customer segments, right? The people who are going to vote. Okay, so let's use this our tendency, to group objects together that are similar to our advantage. It can be for designing visualization, it can be for designing products, it can be for designing marketing campaigns. But the one that I talked about on segmentation is core, is very, very fundamental. Don't be too focused on the left brain. Look at this here. They don't bother about the size. They don't bother so much about the color. Just based on the direction, people are grouping all these fishes as one. Now, the other thing to note, in this grouping tendency is what is not part of the group. Okay, what is not part of the group can be called as an anomaly. It can offer a lot of insights about the group, because an anomaly is something that doesn't fit in with the rest of the data points or rest of the customer groups, right? So studying anomaly, right, that is something that don't fit with the rest of the data points or customers or anything that you're working on. A study of anomalies can give a lot of insights about this grouping tendency. Okay, we can understand the characteristics of groups a lot better. You understand the power of this? Please note that this tendency to group subject is based on similarity, not same. As long as my mind perceives something as similar, I will group that. That's what is happening here. That's what happens in the world of customer segments. Now tell me, how is this important to marketers? Marketers have, people who promote, right, what are called as brand ambassadors. How do you choose your brand ambassador? I want organizations to choose brand ambassadors based on the similarity, right? You think there are 10 customer segments, and do you want to have 10 brand ambassadors or just one or two? So the way you choose, the person whom you choose as brand ambassador should resonate with this similarity aspect. Please note that. That's what I'm trying to convey here. So there's a very, very important aspect. The next one is about closure. We have a tendency to fill in missing parts of an image, to create a whole, right? If there are missing elements, we try to fit in, right? In this one, in this particular logo, right? We tend to fill the missing parts on our own. Nobody needs to tell, right? We do this subconsciously or unconsciously, right? Look at this logo here, IBM's logo here. There are 8 lines, but we correctly identify this as IBM, right? We have an innate tendency to fill parts of an image. You may say that then why do we have this kind of a broken image? See, when you have broken image, you are activating this part of our subconscious mind that is looking to find closure, right? So you are building curiosity, right? When you build curiosity, the level of engagement is more. When the level of engagement is more, the level of recall is more. That's what marketers want, right? So use this tendency of humans to fill in missing parts. How can you apply to the world of visualization? Now, if you see this image, I have presented, the sales data of an organization across different financial years. You can see there are so many patterns here. The peak happens, in July. The trough, the lowest part, happens in Jan. It is progressively increasing. I can say that I can talk about the next financial year also, right? Here I have talked up to 2015, in this particular graph. Let's say I'm in 2015, I'm presenting it. Humans will automatically think about 2016 also. So talk about 2016, right? Because customers or your audience is expecting you to talk about 2016. Don't forget to talk about 2016 is what I'm trying to say, because customers will be thinking about 2016 having identified patterns in this particular visual. Because humans have a tendency to fill in missing parts, they will try to project, they will try to extrapolate, because that is my natural tendency. So think about the next financial year and say that this is also going to be like this. Or if it is not going to be like this, talk about it. People have formed an expectation here, right? 2016 is going to be like this, right? If your 2016 is not going to be like this, talk about it, because people have already decided in their minds. Your audience has decided. When I say audience, it can be your management team that you're presenting about sales performance. Your management team would have formed an opinion, right? You may say that it is needless and uncalled for, right? It is not an explicit conclusion that you're drawing, but still your audience would have drawn this kind of conclusion, because we have this tendency. Are you getting it? That is about closure, right? Now let's talk about the next principle, which is continuation. We have a tendency to follow the smoothest path, right? When we are following something, if you see this logo, we have indicated this continuation aspect. Now what does this signify? It signifies that anything from A to Z is available with Amazon. Is anything from A to Z is available in Amazon? 90% of things that we aspire for, that we want to buy, is available with Amazon, right? True. But is it A to Z? Right? Maybe not. If I want to buy a home, can I buy it in Amazon? No, I cannot buy it. If I want to buy a piece of land in Amazon, no, I cannot do that. Right? But Amazon is trying to convey the perception, right? Is trying to convey the message that they cater to A to Z of what humans want, right? Even though they don't cover A to Z, right? How does this happen? It happens because of this tendency to follow the smoothest path, right? What happens in Google Maps? The same thing appears, right? If you have to go from A to B, right? We follow the smoothest path. Maybe not this kind of path. This path could be shortest. This path could be longest, right? We may choose the longest path. We may even override what Google is suggesting sometimes, right? Because of the smoothest path tendency. Use this to your advantage, right? We can see this in many other aspects of life as well, right? If you see this particular book, let's say you're searching for this particular book in Amazon, right? You are suggested automatically similar objects. This is also based on the tendency that I explained, right? The tendency for continuation. Thus, it is that tendency that marketers are trying to take advantage of, right? When you try to search for this particular book, the site Amazon is recommending, because we have this tendency, right? Because we have this tendency, Amazon is suggesting, and you may probably end up buying this book and maybe Anthony Robbins' book, right? Or maybe this particular book, right? You came to buy just one product, but you ended up buying 3 products. How did that happen? It happened because of this tendency, right? I'm not saying it happened only because of this tendency alone, right? There are so many other factors, right? Like if there are any discounts, if you buy more than one product, is some additional benefits that is available to you. So many factors could be at play, but this factor, tendency, is also at play, right? If you have a visual like this, instead of having boring tables, you can have a breakdown structure like this, a breakdown visual like this. By the way, this kind of visuals are possible in business intelligence systems like Power BI. Okay, it is a Microsoft product. Excel visuals, can be boring, right? Instead of a table, this kind of visual is very meaningful, right? It is easier to interpret, and you can choose which way you want your audience to focus. Instead of this particular direction, you can focus on this. Say there is a discussion about sales, where exactly, which of the countries, which of the segments, which of the product have contributed more, or which of the customers, which of the segments, which of the product lines are problem makers. You can use this breakdown visual to clearly explain where exactly is the problem, or which of the segments, which of the countries, which of the product lines have contributed to higher sales, right? These kind of visuals are more important when you are missing your numbers. When you have met your numbers, it's easier to present the good story, right? When you have a bad story, let's say you have missed your sales numbers and you're presenting to your management, you need these kind of visuals to communicate the problem clearly. People who have trouble communicating the problem clearly, they eventually end up with more problems, right? People who have been in management reviews will understand what I just said, right? When you've missed your numbers, it is all the more important that you communicate clearly. You communicate clearly the problem area. If I had presented this information in the form of a table, I'm sure people would not have understood. Or if I had created multiple graphs, they would not have understood. Whereas a breakdown structure like this, I can easily understand the problem area, right? So much for the power of the tendency of continuation, right? So this is an innate tendency, and I am making use of this tendency to my advantage, right? The next one is about proximity. Proximity is about our tendency to group together items that are located close to each other. I showed this example with another principle. If you see here, the tendency of proximity is also at play. That is another reason that we group this together, right? Now, let's look at this particular U-shaped logo of Unilever, okay? The brand's logo was designed to be symbolic of its vitality mission. If you zoom into this logo and look closely, you will note that the U is actually made up of 25 distinct symbols, each representing this particular Unilever company's sub-brands or corporate values, right? Because they are close together, we tend to assume that this is one. Now look at the different types of tigers here. Would you say that they are one, or are they different, right? Is this really a tiger, or is it something else? I don't know. I'm leaving it to you, okay? But I will say that all these are tigers, right? Maybe it's not a tiger, maybe it's a tiger, right? The same way with Sun Microsystems, right? If you see, this consists of how many U's are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 U's are there. But because they are closely represented, we tend to associate this with, the word that is written here, sun. It is because this word is there, we clearly understand that sun is there, right? So this is another way of grouping. Here, the grouping is based on the proximity, right? As I said, there are 8 U's here. And because this word sun is there, you are able to understand, oh, this is part of the Sun Microsystems and this is the logo. So you understand it clearly, right? So the 8 U's are assumed or interpreted by our brain as representing something similar, right? Belonging to one. The same way with Unilever logo, right? The 25 different symbols are perceived as one, right? The 4 different types of tigers are perceived as one, right? I can't count the number of fishes here, but we tend to assume that all the things that are going in this direction are one, right? So we said proximity is about our tendency to group together items that are located close to one another. Conversely, when you put a space between the items, we perceive things differently. Remember, this is what was originally stated. What you see here is an interpretation, right? I am extrapolating what is originally stated so that I can apply it to different aspects of product design, website design, logo design. If you see here, I am separating these things by different color. I can even separate it by space. I can separate it by a line, just like what I've shown here. This is, by the way, from a website, right? From this website, you can say that, this is something else, and this is totally different. So we are talking of 3 different things, right? This kind of compartmentalization helps us when you want to communicate different things. And we will, because they are all grouped together, we tend to assume that this is one, that is as a single group. When I say one, I'm referring to one single group, right? But they are different from one another, right? If you see this particular visual, this is a company's sales dashboard. All these things will be perceived as one. These two will be perceived as one. This will be different. This will be different, right? Look at the way I've arranged it. I could have arranged it the way I want. I could have used different graphs as well. But I want to use the tendency of proximity to my advantage. So when you design dashboards, keep this principle of proximity in mind, right? When you go against this natural tendency, you make it difficult for your readers or for your target audience to understand you, because out of this dashboard you are communicating a story, right? That's what you are doing. At the end of the day, you are communicating a story out of this visual, right? And you want your people to understand the story well, right? So if you don't understand the story well, the whole idea of creating the dashboard is lost, right? So make use of these principles when you design visuals. In fact, many people ask me, can these principles be applied to visualization? Very well. You can definitely apply. These principles can be applied wherever there are images, right? Wherever there are images, these can be applied. Please have this in your mind, because a logo is what? A symbol, right? When you design a product, it's an image. When you design a visual, it is an image. When you design a website, it's a visual, right? So wherever you have visuals, wherever you have images, these can be applied easily, right? So please keep this in your mind. Okay. The next one is about symmetry and order. This is a very powerful principle. Okay. We have an innate tendency to look for symmetry. I don't know whether you are aware that behind beautiful images, even beautiful faces, there is a lot of symmetry. So when people go for this cosmetic surgeries, right? Face correction surgeries, what really happens? It is the symmetry that gets adjusted, right? So there is so much symmetry that is associated with beauty and order. In all these images, there is symmetry. So if you have to create a visual, if you have to create logo, first try out symmetry, because our human brain from time immemorial associates symmetry with beauty, symmetry with likability, right? So anything that is symmetrical, we tend to assume We tend to think that it is beautiful, that it is something that can be liked. That's what we want as marketers, right? That's what we don't want as creators of visualizations. That's what we want out of our logos. If people can like this logo, they're going to buy more from you, right? There is so much in symmetry. Again, a very basic thing, but it is often overlooked, right? Go for symmetry in everything that you do as far as images are concerned. Avoid non-symmetrical images to the extent possible. I know there are a lot of brands that have non-symmetrical images and they have gone on to succeed, right? But symmetry gives you an advantage. Let's say you are a startup, right? Why do you want to go for a non-symmetrical image? Go for a symmetrical image. Established brands can play with experiment, can play with a lot of images. They have access to capital, which a young organization or a startup will not have, right? So if you want to be risk averse with your logo design, go for symmetry. There's nothing else to think. As I said, people tend to associate symmetry, okay, with beautiful faces. So if you like someone, there is symmetry, right? Why not use the tendency to our advantage in designing logos, right? So symmetry is in nature. This is British Petroleum, right? A huge brand, right? This is McDonald, again a huge brand. This is an image of a leaf and there is symmetry, right? Symmetry is there in nature. If you look at some of the images from telescopes, right, of outer world, you will see there is so much symmetry, okay, in our cosmos, in our universe, right? So use this to your advantage. The next one is figure ground. Here, the tendency is about identifying images in the foreground and in the background. We can differentiate between the two very easily. And the most important aspect is the tendency to identify the hidden motion at play. That is equally important. What you're seeing here, the Rubin vase faces, right? A very old drawing, okay? This is a vase drawing that Danish psychologist Edgar Rubin described, okay? This exemplifies one of the key aspects of figure ground tendency. Not just about figure ground tendencies, but also about edge assignment and its effect on shape perception. In this face vase drawing that you see, the perceived shape depends critically on the direction in which the border or the edge between the black and white regions is assigned. If the edges between the black and white regions are assigned inward, then the central region, the central white region, is seen as a vase shape in front of a black background. No faces are perceived, in this particular case. On the other hand, if the edges are assigned outward, the two black profile faces are perceived on a white background and no vase shape is perceived. The human visual system, right, will settle on either one of the two interpretations. This is a very, very important aspect that we all need to be aware of. Okay. In fact, the imaging of the brain shows that when people see this particular image, okay, there is quite a bit of activity in the temporal lobe, of our brain that is associated with face selection. So there is a lot of things at play here. Now, how can you apply this? If let's say you are a marketer, right? Or if you run an e-commerce store, how do you want to project the image? I'm interested in this particular Black Forest ice cream, right? If you see, initially the image will appear in the background, and after a while, you can, based on what I look at, in my computer screen, you can make this particular image to come on top. I want this particular image to be focused more because I want to make advantage of this particular tendency. So this basic tendency is about distinguishing between a vase and a face, and it depends on the edges. Depending on the edges, we will either see the vase or we will see the images, the two faces. So the same tendency I can extrapolate when I am designing websites, especially for e-commerce, right? Because people decide whether to buy this particular product or not based on this image a lot, more than the price, discount and other factors. If you want to put messages like offer lasts till tomorrow, where do you want to put it? You want to put it in a place where it will be seen prominently, right? And you want to do that subtly, make advantage of this particular tendency. The last one is simplicity. I love this over every other thing, right? So let me give you this example. Before that, what is this simplicity? It's about our tendency to simplify things from complex situations or complex things. If you really see in the 70s, and 80s, by the way, what are these actually? Can you make out before I come to the 70s and 80s story? These are names of computers, right? These are names of computers. In the 70s and 80s, this is how computers were called. Do you think it's easy to remember? Do you think it's easy to associate yourself with? These are like TRS-80, VIC-20, IBM 5150. So when you go to a shop, right, you will ask for, give me a 5150, give me a TRS-80. When Apple came, they named it as Apple 1, Apple 2, Apple 3. There is so much of simplicity, right? This is so complex. How can you remember? How can you recollect? Whereas Apple 1, see, by the way, these are, products that did very well in the market. Okay. But compare these names to Apple 1, Apple 2, Apple 3. It's so much easier to remember, so much easier to relate, right? Because we try to simplify. Whether you're going to like this particular lecture or not depends on how much I have simplified these particular principles to you, right? If I have not succeeded in simplifying, you may not like it. If I have succeeded in simplifying it, you will definitely like it. This is true of not just my lecture or this particular lecture. This is true of any speech, any lesson that you learn, right? Any video that you see, right? Why do we like some movies? Why do we not like some movies? The plot is not clear to us, right? The plot is not clear to us. The story is not clear. The same applies in visualizations too. You're presented reams and reams of data. You're presented 100 graphs, yet the story is not clear, right? You have tried to complicate things. Your management is extremely dissatisfied with you. Why? Because they have not understood what you have presented. Because you have tried to complicate things, right? Always go for simplification, right? Which is why we use call out messages when you're presenting, right? That's not the best approach, as far as I'm concerned, because the way you construct the story itself should be simple enough, right? Do you understand? The same thing applies when you are designing, brand names. For our own company, earlier we used to be called Novus DI. We later changed it to Seaport AI. Why? Because in the part of the world that I operate, okay, especially Asia, Middle East, and other regions, people had trouble pronouncing the word Novus. Okay, maybe in Europe, okay, it's much easier to pronounce and understand. But in Asia and Middle East, people had trouble pronouncing Novus, right? By the way, Novus means new or innovation, right? Because my customers had trouble, pronouncing this, I chose a name that they can understand, they can pronounce easily. If they pronounce easily, they can relate. We want that with brand names, right? So Seaport AI is easier to understand, easier to relate, especially startups, right? Choose names that can be pronounced easily. Again, look at your target segments. As I said, if my target segment is Europe, Novus is very well usable, right? Is very well easy to pronounce. But my target segment is different, right? In my target markets, Novus is difficult to pronounce. Seaport is easier to pronounce. So I chose this. So always keep your customers, at the center of everything that you do before you try to apply these principles, right? So what I've tried to do is I have introduced these principles and I've tried to explain how you can apply these principles, in real life. That's very important, right? What is the point of knowing these principles when you can't apply? So this principle of simplicity and the earlier principles that I applied can be used in communication, can be used in relationships, right? Let's say you are in a relationship, that is plagued with a lot of problems, right? It could be with your significant other, it could be with your children, it could be with anyone, right? With your manager, right? Try to communicate in a manner the tendency to simplify aspect is magnified, right? So use this tendency to your advantage when you communicate, especially in difficult situations, right? Especially in difficult relationships. You can use every other principle that I explained easily, but more so the principle of simplicity, right? So as I mentioned in the beginning of this session, you can use these principles in product design, in logo design, in website design, in data visualization, and also in communicating with different kinds of relationships, right? Communication, is a very, very important aspect, right? In all these images, right, there is communication, right? What I call non-verbal communication, right? There is also another aspect, verbal communication. All these things correspond to verbal communication, right? So communication is both verbal and non-verbal. So you can apply these principles in both verbal and non-verbal. So that's the beauty of these principles, right? They've been around for a long time, but try to use them to your advantage. Because as I said, in the beginning, human beings have natural innate tendencies, to recognize patterns. And we recognize patterns, in a particular fashion, which is what these principles, elaborate, right? So go ahead and apply these principles, to design better products, to segment customers, to design better websites, to design your logo, to communicate better. When you do all of this, you will definitely be successful, right? Okay.